Hello, I'm Matt Frawley. This is Mathey Talks, and there is this mythical figure on campus. His name is Nic Voge. But I can tell you, he is a real person, and he's here with me today. Nic, thanks so much for coming in today.
It's great to be here.
All right. Well, Nic is the Associate Director of the McGraw Center for Teaching and Learning here at Princeton University. Nic, we have the brightest students in the world. Why do we need a Center for Teaching and Learning?
It's a good question. Actually, people ask me that all the time when I'm outside of the orange bubble. Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. I mean, the first one really is that it's not just that college is harder, but it's different. Mm-hmm. No matter where we went to high school, there's no such thing as a liberal arts high school, really. There's no such thing as a research high school. And that fact, those contexts and the faculty and how they're socialized into those communities as a researcher shapes what they do in the classroom, how they teach, what they're trying to accomplish, their goals for students, the way they test, the way they select materials, the curriculum. Everything can be quite different, and so that poses new challenges for students, and we expect that's in fact what we say a liberal arts education is. It's learning how to be an expert learner. So we really think that's important. So just to give you an example, I have a student who came from a really highly regarded prep school. The way he was taught math, and he has a fantastic foundation, was never had a textbook, problem-based seminar discussion. Well, he got here, and that's not the mode that's used in that particular discipline. And so he really had to adjust to the packaging of instruction of the content.
So we have the McGraw Center. It serves a vital need here on campus. And then there's you working at the McGraw Center. How did that come about? Can you tell us your academic pursuits and how it all led to being the associate director here?
Well, yeah. So first, as a little backdrop, the Center for Teaching and Learning at Princeton is kind of unique in that it has the faculty development piece, as well as training graduate students, both as current teachers and as future faculty, and then the learning support for undergrads. And that's actually quite unusual in higher ed. So my previous stop before coming here was at UC Berkeley, where I did my graduate work. And I worked at a learning center there. So that was focusing on providing learning support for students. But I got involved as a graduate student myself, training and developing other graduate students as teachers, because I was studying in the Graduate School of Education at Berkeley in the department, or division, I should say, of Language, Literacy, Society, and Culture. And that's a mouthful, but I'll explain what that means in a little bit.
Right.
So I got really interested in that and working with my peers in thinking about instruction and their development. And then one of my advisors in graduate school was a very accomplished teacher, as well as a fantastic scholar, and he had this position as the chair in university education. And so I was working with him on getting the message out to faculty and doing faculty development. And when all three of these constituencies, these three parties of the learning environment, the graduate student TA, who's like a preceptor, the faculty member, and the students all got in the same room, the conversations about the processes, methods of learning from instruction were so rich and so illuminating. That was really exciting and thrilling. So when this opportunity at Princeton came up, it's as I said, very unique. And so that opportunity to work with all three of these constituencies at once and at different times was really exciting. But the way I got into this work really goes back to after graduation. I immediately went to Japan. I taught English, and that's really I got experience as a teacher. And so I was working with college students and adults mainly on conversational English. When I returned to the United States, I decided I wanted to go. I got a position. I jumped over it. I got a position teaching reading for a private school, which is now national. In fact, you'll see it around here, the Institute of Reading Development. At that time, it was only in California. And so we taught reading to all different ages, from 5-year-old pre-kindergartners to adults, engineers, lawyers, doctors. And it was a great foundation, and I learned a lot about reading.
I'm sure obviously with the 5-year-olds you're teaching reading acquisition. Reading acquisitions at all ages, but was it also, I think it's speed reading, or
so we did different
sub-vocalizing, I guess as it's called, or that's one technique?
Right, so we were addressing different needs or areas at different levels. So even in like the second and third graders, it was really about developing a love of reading, and that the skills were utilized to facilitate that, make reading, the decoding part easy, so kids could enjoy it. So it'd be about immersion. How can they identify with characters? Can they really feel and visualize these stories? And we saw that that is the engine both for developing a love of reading and developing the skills. So we were actually trying to promote that and working with parents on how to do that for those little kids. And then as they, for older kids that had more academic purposes of reading, we helped them with more academic types of skills. And then up through college and adults, it was how to read faster, more efficiently. And you mentioned this thing called subvocalization, which is the internal voice that most of us read with. So we say the words as we view them. And that's actually not necessary for our comprehension. In fact, we understand first and then we say. But it's ingrained in most of us because we were taught to read aloud.
Right.
So that's one of the things. A lot of the things to me were particularly interesting, which I still carry into my work today, is coming to understand the common patterns of writing, to read in a writerly way, to understand the conventions of making arguments and use what's called the structure strategy, to use that to guide our reading, to construct more in-depth analytical representations in our minds of the text. So it's easy to teach people to move their eyes to read fast. The problem is thinking and comprehending twice as fast.
Right.
Yeah, that's the challenge.
So you're here, and we're filming, I think with one more week of school, then we go into reading period, and then obviously the finals. What piece of advice, if you could what piece of advice, or better yet, like if you could wave your magic wand and help the most number of students with one thing, what would it be right now?
At this juncture
I know it's late in the game.
Yeah.
But there's
Well, there's certain things that at this moment in the game is actually best to do, which is to step back from the particulars of the class and try to understand the course as a whole and see how the parts fit together into a coherent design. So it's not always apparent to the student that all the parts fit together and there's a coherence to the class. It's almost like an essay sometimes. It doesn't come together till the end, or a book. And so this is actually a great time to do that. And to grasp that whole and then see how the parts fit.
Right.
And that helps us not only to understand at another level, but helps us remember more. So we remember when we see connections and relationships and organization. There's a saying in cognitive psychology, if I have organization, I don't need to do repetition. And so that would be the strategy. And there's different ways to do that, from mapping out a class with a kind of mind map. So it might be bubbles. It might be creating some sort of your own study guide, where you're very consciously seeking to make connections of the parts. The lectures, going back over your lecture notes, is a really good one, because that's the backbone of almost every class. That's the through line that the professor crafts. And then the readings a lot of times are brought in to support or supplement that, but they weren't written for the class. So if I understand the through line of the lectures, then I can grasp the whole.
Right. What I think we've talked about how that ability to abstract and, let's say, look at a more comprehensive, holistic level of the class is one of the skills, I think, that the students need to learn when they come to college.
Absolutely.
That they probably didn't have to develop in high school. Was it right? Is there let's say there are 2 or 3 other ones that you see the most, that what students don't maybe are it's a bit underdeveloped in high school that needs to work here at college?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's a good question. So I think one is most high schools test on reproduction. Information is delivered to the student, and if they can reproduce that on a test quickly and accurately, then they'll do well. If they get 90% of that or more, they get an A.
Right.
Whereas at Princeton and many other colleges, really it's the application. And so on the one hand, it's learning to apply knowledge. That is a kind of subset of skills, but also how do I prepare myself for that? What study strategies, what learning strategies can I employ to address this other aspect, which is applying my knowledge to solve a new problem, to synthesize in the form of an essay to make an argument, things I haven't actually ever been asked to do before.
And that's gotta be so frightening, because in high school, you pretty much know what's gonna be on the test.
Yeah.
And if there's a problem you've never seen before in your freshman, that first, in October, that's gotta be frightening.
I think it is, and it can shut people down on the test itself.
Right.
sometimes because they have this implicit, they don't even realize it. They think that they should know the answers to problems when they see them. And if they don't, then they get anxious, thinking, I didn't prepare well, I'm not going to do this, rather than interpreting it the way I think most faculty would want, at least for some problems, which is, I need to figure out what the problem is asking me and then figure out the solution. And so it's not necessarily a failing in your preparation if you can't recognize the problem and how to solve it initially. But that feeling that it is can actually get in the way.
Right, interesting.
A second strategy, just what you said, is anticipate, as being able to prioritize information and understand what's important, what are the goals and objectives of a class. The exams will be the place that becomes most clear and concrete to students. Most high school instructors are making that pretty apparent. And that's just by convention, it's not nearly so much the case. So there's this idea that students have to figure out what's important.
Versus, I'm jumping in, it's fascinating because versus, because the high school teacher kind of tells them there's 100% retention needed for what the high school teacher tells you, where here, you just can't do that. I mean, you can't remember 100% what's in the book and what the lecture notes and whatnot. And so the ability to trust yourself, is that to differentiate the wheat and chaff, as you would say? Not wheat and chaff, but just what's going to be important. Yeah,
what's most important, and most important from an expert's point of view as well, or for a particular class. Just one particular point that I would make, the textbooks are not written for a Princeton audience because there's not a big enough one. So what Princeton professors want students to learn from a math class or a science is, we're a really elite institution. So, there aren't necessarily elite textbooks. So that may not even be in the textbook. So figuring out what is important, but I think it also can relieve students. We don't have to master every piece of information, and which puts a lot of strain on our memory and memorization, which often is not fun. It's more thematic, conceptual, and so that can, while it's risky, if you will, to not try to master everything, and that's true, I think, it's also liberating to know that if I truly and deeply understand something, I don't have to resort to trying to memorize everything.
You don't have to memorize that fifth example in that chapter or whatever. You've got it and you can figure it out. So one reason I wanted to film and have you come in today was that I know you have a new initiative at the McGraw Center, Principedia. So can you tell us what that's all about and how it kind of how it helps in your overall goal of helping Princeton students here adapt and develop their abilities to teach and learn?
Well, so Principedia is based on an observation that Princeton students are good learners. They're excellent learners, often cases. And giving them general advice often isn't really the issue. So what we're trying to do is help them think about individual courses, the tasks that make up that course, and to reflect on that and actually develop a strategy and approach for each class. So one thing that's different in college and high school is there's a lot of variety in the way that you're taught and a lot of complexity even within a class. You have a lecture, you have precept, you have P-set, you have supplementary readings. There's lots of channels of information, and figuring out how to align one's learning to the instruction for one class, let alone different ones, is quite challenging. So our emphasis in McGraw, the kind of philosophy, is that it's context-specific kind of learning, and that actually reflects my graduate emphasis education. So Principedia, what it's designed to do is collect the growing and developing insights of all students about how to learn at Princeton and how to learn in particular courses. So it's a crowdsourcing of the collective intelligence of Princeton students and other staff. So what we ask people to do is reflect about how they're taught in a particular class, describe that, identify challenges of learning in those classes, and then to describe strategies and methods, techniques, mental processes that they've adopted to achieve in those classes. Our thought is that that's an excellent thing for students to share. It serves the interests of the faculty, serves the interests of the students. We all learn better when we talk about how are you learning. One way I like to capture that is a common phrase you'll hear from students is, how'd you do on a test, right? Project. And I would like them to say, how'd you do it? Because then opens up another kind of conversation, this methods processes of learning.
So, I'm going to be a freshman next year. I come into, Princeton. I hear about this Principedia. I go in. What am I going to see? How am I going to navigate it?
Great question. So, on the one
Thank you.
we like good questions, so we think that
right.
the Principedia is all about asking slightly different questions. Well, what they're going to see, we have a site right now. We're about to transform that, and so in the fall it would look quite different. But
so I just probably really by right now on the finished product that you'll see that we'll have the current version of Principedia up, but that will change, and we'll hopefully edit the video to
update that. That would be fantastic.
Update the video to show that.
So what they're going to see is an interface that gives them lots of ways to navigate to different kinds of content. So some content is general. It's talking about how to adapt to Princeton learning, maybe large lecture classes, or what does a math class at Princeton expect of students, and how would you adjust? What do tests look like, and why? But we think the most unique content, hopefully the most powerfully useful content, is descriptions of particular courses. So there'll be a way to navigate by department, and students can go to a page or click on a link to a department. Then within that department, there'll be ways to get to different classes. So if they're signing up for Eco 100 as a freshman, and they want to know, well, how am I going to be taught in that class? Will I be tested? And what is a Princeton student who's taken that class and thought about it a lot? What advice can they share for me about how to be successful there? So there'll be these articles, they're wikis, so they can be added to at all times. It's growing and developing. The key way to navigate it, though, is that there are these. You can go through the department. You can go by the department. So we think that students are thinking about learning in terms of their courses. So we want to deliver just-in-time advice in relation to a course.
Now, how can I trust the information? How is it curated and to make sure that I go in and I can really, obviously I'm responsible for how I approach a class, but I need some help. How do I know this is going to steer me to a better course?
That's a very good question. On the one hand,
I think I'm batting 1,000 right now with my questions.
Yes, you are.
Well, thank you.
The batting metaphor.
That's right. I feel affirmed.
So I think one part of that is who we're soliciting content from. So tutors, peer advisors, learning consultants, writing fellows, they spend a lot of time and acquire a lot of insight by virtue of being a student, but then having these conversations. And so they're really deepening their knowledge. So they bring that not just to their tutoring interactions, but to their own courses. And then we prompt them with a set of questions that we've really crafted very specifically. Okay. And so I think a lot of the quality control comes from the kinds of questions that we're asking them, and then the preparation and training that these students have gotten by virtue of their roles, and then that they're, in many cases, they're advanced students in the classes. And, they self-select. Princeton students want to give good advice. If they don't feel prepared to do it, they just don't choose to do so. But then once it's up and available, we have some ways for people to add advice, to comment on other advice.
And how we were talking about this before filming. 8 years down the road, I look at some class. I go on there. Is it going to be just 10 pages long with all this information? That would be
might be
disincentive to even engage.
Well, I think there's a challenge there. But one of the things we're doing is we believe that the way each professor teaches the class and packages it is distinct and important to acknowledge and recognize. So we have articles for specific professors and classes. And so I think that limits, it's not a long laundry list of every way that this class could be, Math 100 could be taught, or that Anthro 345 is taught from year to year with different professors. That we really think it's important that you learn from the instruction that you receive from that instructor. So that instructor, and so that, one of the consequences of that is that you're not going to get a long list of feedback. So compared to like course evaluations, if you look at course evaluations, sometimes that are online from Princeton, there's some useful advice in there, but it's embedded with sometimes with these big classes, hundreds of other responses. It's not easy to get to. So I think there actually is good advice in there, but it's hard to find, and we think this would be much more accessible.
And how, as of right now, how much content is there?
We've got about 45, 50 articles that we'll be developing, and then there's a lot of content at a more abstract level about how to learn in quantitative courses or in calculus generally, or what is calculus and how would you go about learning it. A lot of our content that exists on our website now will be folded in. So, and linked. So that's another thing that's a feature of the architecture, is we'll have a lot more hyperlinks within our content. So when students are reading and thinking about a class, and they say, yeah, that's right, you know, note-taking in this class is really important according to this, but what are my methods? What's a good way to do that? Well, we have some content on our current site, and so the linkages will be clearer. So in terms of the articles, there's about 40, but we have a lot of other content that will be included.
Cool. So what question did I not ask about Principedia?
Where did it come from? I don't know if I mentioned that.
Where did it come from?
It was kind of a fun story. I think it was. One day, because I think it points to really the knowledge and expertise of students. And that's really what Principedia is saying, is students know a lot. They know more about learning in the class than the professor does who teaches it. And we want to recognize that and acknowledge that, and we want to help students have these conversations and exchange that knowledge and then organize it and circulate it. But one day I was in my office, this was actually at UC Berkeley, so I've been thinking about this idea for about 6 years or 7 years now. And the tutoring was happening right out of my office. That's just the nature of our arrangement. And I was listening to I was working at my computer, and I could hear this writing tutor that I knew, because I did training of her cohort. And I was just listening, and I was kind of, wow, she is really knowledgeable. She knows a lot about writing at Berkeley, and it's very specific to the context, and I was just amazed at how much she knew. Then one thing I realized, I thought, you know what, a lot of that stuff she wasn't trained in either. We didn't teach her that as the sort of administrators or program developers. So then I realized, well, and she's going to graduate. And I thought, oh, what a shame, all that knowledge. So I thought, well, wait a second, that's kind of everybody. We all recognize how much we learn in our 4 years of college, or more years of college, and we carry it with us, but it's very siloed. We don't necessarily exchange, except sometimes in these trainings and things of tutors. How could we collect that? How could we organize that? And then exchange that? And that was really the beginning of that. So I kind of had that question, how would we collect the knowledge that all of us are developing, but we really don't have a forum to exchange it?
So this is fairly unique then. I mean, it's not like a lot of colleges are
It's
doing
first of its kind,
Wow.
one and only at this point. Although Stanford is, I talked with them, they like the idea, they've talked about Stanfordopedia. It doesn't quite roll off.
Doesn't roll off,
Does
yeah,
not
no.
roll off the tongue. I appreciate their, getting on board, but they might want to change the name. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't even think right now of anything. How would it
So no, but I think that there is some kind of crowdsourcing and various other ways is happening, from tutoring to, but not quite the same way. We really hope that faculty get on board and administrators. You're a preceptor. You've seen lots and lots of students in RCA. You've accumulated a lot of knowledge, and there's a place for your expertise as well in Principedia. We just need to figure out how to tap that and then get it to students when they want it and need it.
Right. Well, it's great, Nick. I just, you know how much I appreciate your work down at McGraw, and I'm really excited about this. So
thanks so much.
Thanks for taking the initiative. I know it's a lot of work, but what's great is it really is a communal effort, and I think it's just going to always be improving, which is really exciting. So
yeah, I think what students really like, is they like the idea of leaving a legacy.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. No, and I see that all the time. I mean, like from Princeton Preview, where just the freshmen here now want to give back to the incoming freshmen, or hopefully the incoming freshmen, and the RCAs, they really do care about the students behind them, so to speak. Yeah,
so if we can tap into that ethos,
right,
then we can contribute to it and benefit from it.
Well, great. Well, again, thank you for taking the initiative. Thank you for coming in today, and just, again, thank you for the great work at McGraw.
Thank you, Matt. It was great to be
Awesome.
here.